Thank you to both of you for being here and taking time out of your busy schedules to share with us your thoughts on space sustainability. I'd like to start with your company's general stance on space sustainability. How would you describe your internal vision and strategy for this topic? And what do you consider the most important aspects for responsible operations in space? Theresa, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Krystal. Thank you for having me. So I think I'll start by saying that for us, of course, space sustainability matters. I think if you're operating in low Earth orbit, you can't think anything else. Our whole infrastructure is in LEO, and so therefore our livelihood and business success are dependent on keeping that environment safe and the ability for players to use it. To give a little bit of context, we've been operating in low Earth orbit since 2013. We have a changing number of satellites that are in low Earth orbit over that time. Generally speaking, we're somewhere between 50 and 100 satellites in low Earth orbit. I think I probably don't have to tell this crowd about the types of benefits that come from using satellites to improve life on Earth. So everyone is pretty aware of things like weather forecasting, wildfire monitoring, safety and security applications, and all the benefits that they bring to people living here. And so I think that's very important to keep in mind when we talk about space sustainability. And the other aspect of this is innovation. And there's so much happening in the space sector today that we need young companies, we need new technologies, and that's something that is pretty important to recognize. And oftentimes that can be a little bit in tension when you talk about space sustainability, when you talk about increasing regulation. So from a high-level perspective, I think we care about this topic and figuring out how do you balance those things without destroying innovation and destroying small companies, particularly in this current moment in Europe, where everyone knows we need innovation, knows that we need growth. From a Spire-specific perspective, just very quickly, I would say that we care very much about being a responsible operator. So this means following international standards and norms, things like ISO regulations around space debris mitigation, the 5-year deorbiting norms, and then, of course, having very careful operations and doing a lot of interaction and coordinating with all of the other LEO space operators.
Thank you so much for that. Jean-François, I'd like to turn to you to hear about Eutelsat's approach to space sustainability.
Well, actually, I'm not here by coincidence. Thank you for inviting me, because, I mean, definitely space sustainability is for us, Eutelsat, absolutely critical. I mean, I'm like Theresa stating that it is an absolute must for us. As you know, Eutelsat is present in the space industry for more than 45 years, actually. I mean, originally we were obviously a geo-satellite operator. So these are topics that understand, and I say I understand because I'm new in the company. I'm in my job for now 4 months, so you will apologize because you in the room are in this sector, I guess, for many years. So the company is really, I mean, Eutelsat, looking at these topics for many years. But you know that since actually more than 2 years, we have acquired OneWeb, so we are also a very important player in the LEO space. I mean, we are having actually the second operational constellation, low Earth orbit constellation, which is delivering broadband services all over the globe. We are running at an orbit of 1,200 kilometers, 650 satellites. So this is obviously absolutely a business critical topic. I mean, the topic of space debris, for instance, is absolutely critical to us. The topic of deorbiting and how we are preparing that is also a topic on which we could spend more time. So again, absolutely critical topic. We are obviously following up and of course complying to the existing regulations. And I must say that whether this is in France for our I won't say a geo-satellite fleet, or in the UK as concerns OneWeb. And for those two countries, I mean, the regulations are, I think, one of the most stringent regulation in the world, to which we are complying. But maybe we'll come back on that as well. I mean, regulation is important, but it has to be also reasonable and not to be an impediment for our business or for innovation, as you were absolutely, Theresa, rightfully stating a minute ago.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll definitely come back to regulation, as that's a huge part of what we want to talk about today. For the moment, I'd actually like to shift specifically to designing for space sustainability. How does your company approach this issue in your unique constellations, in orbit servicing, materials, deorbiting capabilities, the use of SSA, other aspects? What are you thinking about when it comes for designing for space sustainability? And I think this time I'll start with Jean-François.
Thank you. So these are very interesting, obviously, topics that have been, again, I mean, since the start, taken in account by actually OneWeb. Let me give you two examples as concerns in-orbit servicing, which is a kind of new field, and there are projects, there are trials, but since the start, very, very concretely, on each of our 650 OneWeb satellites, actually you have a hook. Might sound a bit basic, but there is a hook, and it has been designed since the start with a hook. Well, obviously, in order to be able, in the future, to potentially take this satellite, change the orbit of it in case, and unfortunately, I'm touching wood, as we say in France, because we didn't have such a problem yet, but in case one of your satellites would be becoming completely dysfunctional, then we have this possibility to have it taken by a vehicle and taken to different orbits. Or, I mean, this is something we have designed from the start, and this is a design we are maintaining, obviously, in the new generation of satellites we are planning to launch in the coming years. By the way, we have also a project which we are very proud of with ESA, actually to service these satellites in orbit using these features. Another example I'd like to give, I mean, in terms of actually, being aware of what we have around us in the space, in order, obviously, to avoid any collision, because, I mean, when you are having 640 satellites at these orbits, I mean, they are turning around the Earth in less than 2 hours, so they are going at incredible speeds, which is quite obvious. So we are having, also by design, a very incredible, software, which is with sources of objects that are gravitating around the Earth, calculating the probability of a collision. And when, obviously, the probability of collision with one of our vehicles is turning to be too high, basically we are taking over the flight of this specific satellite to deroute it in order to avoid or to put ourselves the further from these possible other objects that we see coming, to obviously avoid collision, because collision would be obviously absolutely horrible thing to happen, because it would create other debris, and then it would create a very complex situation up there. So why am I saying that? Is that taking the responsibility, taking over one specific satellite to change slightly its orbit, it has a cost, because obviously we are using propellant, we are using some of the features of the satellite for that, but we do it because obviously we want to behave responsible in space, and this is not only important for us, but this is important for everyone, because the space is shared by all of us, and there are more and more, obviously, satellites at low orbits. And those are two very concrete examples of what we are doing, and we are doing that, again, by design and daily and operationally to be really behaving responsible in space.
Thank you very much for those insights into how you're planning for space sustainability from the very beginning. Theresa, how are you approaching this issue at Spire?
Yeah, we're very focused on keeping the size of our satellites very small. So I think, as many of you know, we're focused and exclusively put up nanosatellites, which are very tiny. So they have very small surface area, they have very low mass. And this concept of miniaturization is something that continues to be important to us. So a lot of times in the space sector today, you hear people talking about going larger and larger size satellites to have improved capability. And we really have a focus on how do you keep improving the technology such that you can miniaturize it and improve the capability per kg that you put up in orbit. And so that's really a focus of how we design that constellation. I think the other aspect of it is around multi-use. And this is something that we talk about a lot, is not just putting up one payload and having one use case for our constellation, but actually putting multiple payloads on every satellite that allow us to then monetize across different markets, that allow us to use software to change how we might operate that constellation depending on the use case, that allows us to change how we might process the data coming down from the same type of payload. And that's really all about how do you get the most efficiency possible out of what you put up in orbit. And we have seen it that over the years, we've actually had a decrease in the size of our constellation to some extent because the capabilities of what we put up, the amount of data that we're able to collect has actually improved per satellite that we put up. I think, again, from a manufacturing and operational perspective, right, we follow those kind of ISO standards around spacecraft manufacturing and those types of norms. And then, again, when it comes to operations, we have our own software that we created to manage the constellation fleet, our own ground station network. And at the same time, we have 24/7 live operators. I think most satellite operators do that, who are constantly monitoring and looking. And it's the same thing. We're using multiple external sources to help us track and look at what is happening all around us, and have very specific protocols in place for what those operators need to do in a given situation. And I think that's super important. And I think one of the things that a lot of people don't always fully appreciate in this sector, who are not necessarily operating constellation, is how much interaction and coordination you can have among the various operators who have satellites in orbit. We all are talking to each other and managing the situation.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to talk about it, that efficiency for space sustainability. I don't know that I hear it spoken about in quite that way, and to hear about how you're maximizing and coming up with different ways to use the technology, I think that's a really unique perspective. I want to turn now to policy and regulation and get a sense of what is your current assessment of European policy initiatives for space sustainability, particularly in light of some of the unstable geopolitics that we've been discussing previously. And in terms of, both of your countries serve the US, European, and other markets. Are you concerned about divergence in regulatory approaches at all? Theresa?
So I can say that we are engaged pretty heavily around regulation, both in the United States as well as what takes place in Europe. I think directly with regulators as well as through industry associations and the entire space ecosystem. So I think we're viewing it as incredibly important and as part of the process. What I can say is maybe talk about the things that we care about, that we think all regulators need to be paying attention to. And I would say the first thing is clarity, which is having regulation be put in place in such a way that you understand, who it applies to, how, in what way. So there's certainty about how we as operators need to behave. I think the next one is around cost. It's around minimizing process and streamlining as much as possible possible, and paying attention to timeline. Because if you're doing something and it takes 5 years for you to get a response and move through all the bureaucratic channels, clearly that's not good for business. It's also not good for new companies and innovators who don't have an entire department of policy experts that can interact with regulators. So this I think is a really important point. The other one to talk about and mention is proportionality, and this is where I think people also don't always realize not every satellite is the same, not every constellation is the same, not every use case, not all technology and capabilities that are in orbit are the same. And there's sometimes a tendency to use a blanket one-size-fit-all thought process around regulation. And so I think having proportionality and understanding what are the different risks, different technology capabilities, different needs of the different actors in space is something that is important for regulators to consider. And then I think the final one is probably going to be around what you mentioned initially, which is harmonization. We do stuff, as you said, in the United States and in Europe, and I think you do want to make sure on an international basis, in fact, that there is coordination around what regulators are doing, because you don't want, in one instance, bad actors to go and do kind of jurisdiction hopping and mess things up for everyone else. At the same time, you don't want to over-regulate so that only a few companies can have the funding or the capability to manage to comply, and you don't want to kill innovation in markets that desperately need it. So having good harmonization and good clarity, I don't know how anyone would say that that's not important.
Yeah, and especially important right now. We're approaching a critical time for that. I also like your point about the capacity of space companies to engage here, that the importance of precise and accurate and appropriate regulation is really important, but also to consider the capacity of industry to engage. We often talk about how industry is getting ahead of regulation, but there is also whether industry has the capacity to engage in all of the places and in all of the ways that are most appropriate to make sure that we end up in a place that works for everyone. So I'd like to hear from Jean-François as well.
First of all, I have to say that I'm fully aligned with what Theresa has been stating. I mean, this is a fascinating topic. I'm new in the sector, so I'm coming with new eyes. I mean, obviously, there is a lot of fragmentation, I mean, it's quite understandable because each country is looking what's happening above their head. The only small issue we are having is that, especially talking about constellations, that was the case with, in a way, with GEO's satellites. I mean, they were situated above a number of countries, but now with these LEO constellations, obviously they are all over the world. So there is really the need of some kind of coordination amongst different actors. Yes, it looks like Europe is going in a direction which seems to us positive. US is always also going in a direction. I mean, we absolutely don't want to oppose things. I mean, we are running important business and a lot of business in the US ourselves, Eutelsat. So obviously, there is really the need for coordination and for these regulation bodies to speak to each other. Nonetheless, there is the need, we believe, in more, let's say, coordination. For instance, I want to touch one topic, which is space traffic coordination. I mean, you were referring to that topic. I mean, now it's more or less best effort. It's each actors are talking to each other. I mean, nonetheless, we see that there are more and more projects. There will be probably more and more objects up there, and there would be the need for an international, coordination entity on this matter. And it cannot be just one country or one geographical zone like Europe defining their own rules, the US other rules. I mean, Asia, a third set of rules. I mean, again, this is important for us because you were stating it, Theresa. I mean, we want to avoid over-regulation. We want to avoid very long delays to get authorization for what we have to do. I mean, obviously, there is a need of regulation. We respect regulation. And there is really a lot to do. And I believe this is in a way normal. The industry is a bit ahead these topics, but these topics are critical and very important in a lot of areas in our business.
Thank you so much. I just want to remind the audience that we will have time for 1 or 2 audience questions in just a minute. So please do enter everything that you would like to hear about into our app. Jean-François, I want to come back to what you said about how you recently joined the space industry, serving senior roles throughout the telecommunications industry. And I think it's an interesting opportunity for us to hear about what you think our community might be able to learn from adjacent industries who've certainly also faced a different but related set of sustainability issues.
I can tell you one thing that really struck me when I joined the industry a few months ago. Versus the telecom industry I have been operating for more than 30 years, is the complete lack of interoperability, the complete lack of some kind of normalization in the space business. I mean, this is I understand the reasons why, but I mean, when we talk about sustainability and responsibility, environmental responsibility, I think these will be topics we will need to touch because obviously none of our OneWeb antennas are compatible with Starlinks, nor will they be with Skypers, nor will they be with the Chinese constellations. So every actor. And it's also understood why, because these are competitive barriers, competitive entry barriers, but none of the actors have, again, interoperable systems, which obviously is the case in the telecom business. I mean, you can take your mobile, even if you bought it in the US, and use it in Europe over the same networks, because there were these efforts of interoperability, there were these efforts of normalization. Well, I know that it's going to take a lot of time, but I mean, when you're asking me what struck me first arriving in the space industry, and especially in this industry of low orbit constellations and services, this is this topic that everyone has his own, let's say, technology, which is absolutely not compatible with the others.
Thank you for your frank insight. Theresa, you look like you have a comment to make there. Feel free.
I think that's a really good point, and it's really interesting to hear someone who a little bit outside of the industry coming and noticing it so strongly. And I think that's also because the commercial space sector is so new, right? It's 15 years old, give or take, right? And I think there are efforts to start to talk about interoperability and standardization, which does come back to this question of sustainability, because then you just get greater usability, more use cases that you can support when you potentially have interoperability between technologies. So there's like slow movements in that direction, but I think you're right that it will still take some time. It's just an immature industry still.
Yeah, we're certainly looking at places where standards and other opportunities for this exist, but it's a great point. I want to switch to a slightly different topic now, and this actually came up in our last panel as well. But Theresa, you've written and spoken a lot about how commercial partners are strategic accelerators of national and regional civil and defense needs. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about your thoughts here and how you see this affecting space investment in particular. Does the increasingly dual-use nature of commercial space services pose any particular business challenges, risks, opportunities?
I think you can't be in the space sector today, or certainly in the satellite sector, and not, to some extent, talk about defense. Because that's the type of geopolitical situation that we are in, and by nature, when you talk about space, it is going to impact defense. So I think you have to talk about dual use to an extent. Now, when you come in Europe, right, you're having a lot of increase of budgets going to defense, a lot of countries talking about much larger numbers than they've ever done before. And I think at the same time, certainly in some countries, there's not necessarily a great understanding of where that money is going to come from in the future. And so this is why dual use also absolutely matters, because it comes back to this efficiency question where you're taking a given budget, a finite amount of money that you can put to a problem. And so you need to pool those resources and pool those capabilities when you need capabilities now and you need to drive innovation now. And I think you also run into this question of operational capabilities. And how do you use stuff that is already in orbit? There, you don't need to put up any kind of duplicate assets where you can get access to something right away to be used, right now. Then going to commercial space companies that have that capability is enabling everyone to have capabilities and move forward. Whether that's smaller countries that don't have any capabilities or access, or ways that commercial companies can partner and in certain cases accelerate, or also accelerate new innovation, moving on that chain into operational capability. There's, I think, a lot of talk recently, and you see it in the press a lot recently as well, about sovereign capabilities and also the potential for commercial companies to play a role partnering in that. And I think that's absolutely a trend. In some sense, it's kind of putting up duplicative infrastructure because countries want to have enough control and sovereign capability. And I think at the end of the day, given the geopolitical situation, sometimes that probably just has to be the way it is and has to make sense. And then I think in other areas, you can work with commercial companies where it is kind of this partly used for civil or commercial opportunities, partly used, related to defense opportunities. And we're in the type of world where you're not doing one or the other necessarily. You're doing a mix of both. And I think that means that you need to have, increasing partnership between all the actors in the sector.
Fantastic. I do want to switch quickly to an audience question that we received. One thing that we've been asked about is, it says, beyond debris mitigation, what data sources or providers are your companies and infrastructure reliant on to ensure reliable, sustainable services? So essentially, like, what partnerships, who else are you working with in the industry? And specifically, they say, what commercial relationships are you developing to ensure consistent access to key data that you need to act, whether it's around P&T, space weather, SSA, et cetera? So I'll start with you, Jean-François.
I want to come back on your previous question about, the duality of our business. It's in the core of our strategy at Eutelsat. We very strongly believe that we need to have both. On one side, the pure commercial business. On the other side, I would say the more gov, sovereign, and eventually defense-related business. By the way, it's public. We have signed an important contract with the French Ministry of Defense, with whom we are starting very heavily to work on three, dimensions and directions. First is obviously the use of our capacity and our services for warfare purposes. What the war in Ukraine has been actually demonstrating is that more and more civil means and tools are being used actually for warfare. Obviously the cost of these tools is largely inferior, and this is pretty new. I think this is a pretty new paradigm that we see. At least this is what the French defense has been explaining us, and this is the reason why we have signed this contract with us. That's one. The second topic is actually coming back to what you were saying earlier, Theresa, is about embarking potential other payloads in our satellites, because we are planning to launch 440 satellites in the coming years to complete and extend our constellation. So we are also reserving some space in our satellites to embark other payloads, because this is also a very important part of our, sustainability efforts. It's very obvious that when you embark another payload, it's really win-win situation. For us, it's bringing additional financial benefits, helping us to support the cost of our constellation. For the persons which is embarking their own payload on our satellites, it's obviously much less costly. It's faster. It's obviously not to have to pay their own launcher. So it's really win-win on all the fronts. And of course, the third topic we are going to touch with the defense is of course is hardening of our constellation. I mean, I'm not going to enter in details here, but we have a very flexible technology and technical setup at OneWeb, which is actually enabling partners to add on their own services, and we are going to work on all the cyber part, the cryptology part of our constellation for, let's say, some more ardent purposes. Well, anyway, what I want to state is that this is really in the core of our strategy at Eutelsat to actually walk on the both legs.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Theresa for some closing thoughts. I think this is a great one to end on. You know, what are the partnerships that we're looking at? Because you guys have done a great job outlining the challenge we're facing with defense and dual use. And I just want to close on, you know, who else are you working with the industry and in what way around sustainability and your other needs?
Yeah, so I mean, I mentioned that we use some external service providers when it looks at tracking what is around us, as well as, you know, some of our own tools. And I think I'm not going to throw out names necessarily, but we work with a variety of both publicly provided data sets as well as with some commercial partners. And I think what is interesting and in fact exciting is that this whole area of space sustainability, there are a lot of new companies being created that are trying to participate in helping to solve this problem or create an environment where we all can use LEO in a good way without causing problems, and kind of thinking well ahead of time what this has to look like. And so I think it's a great opportunity for these companies to really figure out their business plans, to grow, to show that they have interesting capabilities. And so I think I will leave it there, that I think this is a pretty exciting area of growth for the sector in general.
That's really exciting. So I want to take this opportunity to thank both of you. Again, I know you are two incredibly busy people doing really amazing things in the space industry, and that these are questions that you face daily as you figure out how we're going to design, how we're going to sell, who we're going to partner with. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us today some of those thoughts. I think it was really interesting to see the back and forth of two very different companies, and some of the same things and some of the very different things. So again, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for joining us at the Summit for Space Sustainability, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting us.